by the bimbo, die by the bimbo. That, in a nutshell, should be the criteria reporters use to decide whether to blow the whistle on politicians who play around. It's nobody's business that a prospective Supreme Court justice smoked marijuana in college, or even that a presidential candidate had a discreet affair. It is definitely out of bounds to ask a candidate if he or she has ever been unfaithful to a spouse. But it is relevant and legitimate when a politician displays a continuing pattern of hitching up with one floozy after another. It's relevant because a pattern of illicit trysts shows a lack of judgment that could affect the way a candidate conducts himself in office. You must admit that a relentless pursuit of sexual gratification might tend to take priority over running the ship of state. Talk about the public's right to know, one of journalism's favorite phrases. Don't the American people have the right to know about any activity that could influence how politicians perform their duties as elected officials? For that matter, shouldn't business reporters use the same criterion when they evaluate the performance of corporate executives? If a chief executive has a serious drug or alcohol problem, that dependency will certainly affect his or her job performance, which will have substantial impact on the bottom line and the company's stock price. Yet the press very rarely reports on the personal conduct of top management. Some years ago, Advertising Age reported that the chief executive of a major packaged goods company was fired by the board of directors because he was a drunk. We were severely criticized for printing the story, yet his successor spent the next several years undoing some of his deals. Because the chief executive's behavior was the main reason for his dismissal, we decided we had to report it. Media are blamed for raising expectations to an unrealistic level. A few months ago, Barry Diller, who got the Fox network underway for Rupert Murdoch in 1988, said it probably would have failed if it was started today. It would have received such frenzied hype that Fox could have never lived up to expectations. Today, he suggested, there is an overpowering rush to judgment, and once a perception or event sets in, it's hard to change it. Conventional wisdom is that the information superhighway is off track, it's delayed, it's not meeting anyone's expectations. In an era of instant fulfillment, Barry Diller said, it's as if it was going to take place in an hour and a half. If the press has to take partial blame for raising expectations, it also must take the rap for spreading cynicism and gullibility. Susan Estrich of the University of Southern California Law Center put it this way at a magazine conference several months ago. Cynicism has become the national religion, and you people have become the high priests and priestesses. She added, we all play the game of gotcha with such fervor and skill. We're destroying public confidence in everything. The current issue of Columbia Journalism Review headlines the cynicism run rampant in a generation of vipers and asks if cynicism is curable. The most negative analysis is that the cynicism of contemporary journalism is simply one facet of an increasingly cynical culture. A vicious circle may be at work here. Cynical coverage tailored to a cynical public, which makes the public more cynical and begets more cynical coverage. Future journalists absorb cynical values through the trashy pop culture of Hollywood and Madison Avenue. These days, cynicism abounds even in comic books, the article noted. The antidote for a future of spirit would seem to be belief, an attachment to cosmic values. Today's generations of cynics in journalism and elsewhere seems afraid to believe. Well, if they're afraid to believe, maybe it's because we don't want to be disappointed. The press is quick to pick up anything and run with it when it involves someone famous or important. It was what Anthony Lewis, writing in the New York Times, referred to as a savaging of the great. He noted the case where a federal civil lawsuit was filed by a man who claimed he had been sexually abused as a teenager by Joseph Cardinal Bernardine, now head of the Catholic Church in Chicago. And after much damaging publicity, the suit, based on dubious claims of therapeutically recovered memory, was dropped. Responsible journalism is not stenography, Mr. Lewis said. It requires judgment on the credibility of sources and of claims. The press learned that in the heyday of Senator Joe McCarthy, learned that it was not honest to keep reporting his scurrilous charges without putting them in the context of his record. The Bernadine case suggested the lesson must be constantly relearned. But while we may rush to knock over pedestals on the one hand, the failure of the press to tell the whole story may keep pedestals intact or keep a certain spin to story when it should be checked. Several months ago, Christina Hoff Sommers, author of Who Stole Feminism? How Women Have Betrayed Women, accused magazine editors of abandoning their critical faculties. She said that editors display uncritical credulity toward feminist claims and causes and are extremely wary of anything contrary. She said, journalists have a saying, when your mother says she loves you, check it out. What's happened to that, Ms. Sommers asked. And the sports world is not immune. The recent revelations about Darryl Strawberry and his partying teammates are a sad testament to the players and to the sports writers who follow them. Mr. Strawberry, the one-time star outfielder for the New York Mets, was quoted in a Sports Illustrated article that the Mets were a team full of drunks when he played with them. Strawberry said he played games when he was drunk or just getting off a drunk or coming down off of amphetamines. So what's new? Baseball has had a tradition of attracting hard-living, hard-drinking, women-chasing guys, some downright mean like Ty Cobb. Why shouldn't we expect anything different today? Well, for one thing, yesterday's players weren't paid $1 million a year. For that kind of money, fans have a right to demand maximum performance, undiluted by drugs or booze. But where were New York's crusading sports journalists when the Mets were living it up? Apparently, it was an open secret. The players were not averse to a good time after the game. The problem is that athletes have been coddled their whole lives, and they expect and get the same treatment from sports writers. The jocks will refuse to give reporters their usual stockpile of inane quotes if the newspapers write anything of a probing nature about the players' off-field activities. I think in some ways baseball is getting like wrestling. You can't believe what you see and you can't believe what you read. No wonder nobody seems in much of a hurry to return to baseball. If you believe that readers, viewers, and consumers are entitled to the full story as I do, then how can we not be outraged by marketers, by advertisers, who hide their identity? It should not be done, but it should be noted that media allows this to happen. I'm talking here about companies like Philip Morris, Miller Brewing, and E&J Gallo. Philip Morris, to push a new discount cigarette called Dave's, has fabricated Dave's Tobacco Company with good old country boy promotional and ad support. No mention of the real company name in the package or in the advertising. Miller, a unit of Philip Morris, is using the name Plank Road Brewery to hide from what it hopes will be the market for its Red Dog brand. Gallo's best-known use of the technique was those good old boys, Bartles and James, who used to sell wine coolers, and there was nary a reference to the Gallo corporate name. And I'm afraid much of the new interactive media will blur the distinction even further between advertising and entertainment. So I wanted to get my 2 cents in today, and I've already spent about a nickel. But there's one more issue I feel must be raised when we discuss ethics in the media. What's happening is that vertical integration has come to the communications business. Not only will the consumer goods companies like Coca-Cola control the distribution chain for their major products, but they may also control the TV shows and even the TV or cable stations where they were advertised, or in this new interactive age, the CD-ROMs they could send out to interested consumers of Coca-Cola. Worse still, the ownership of the channels of communication by even larger, more powerful media conglomerates increases the danger of a hidden agenda, or the perception of a hidden agenda, in what we get from the media. For example, here's a hypothetical dilemma. A newspaper used to support a candidate because it believed he was right. But when the paper is part of a huge conglomerate, we are left to wonder about motives, about their hidden agenda. Or if a politician has the power to influence rules for station ownership, should that politician sign a lucrative book deal with a conglomerate that's in both businesses? The deal may be perfectly legitimate, but it raises the perception of something wrong and breaks down trust in the media. Will a magazine or newspaper withhold a story entirely because it's unfavorable to the conglomerate that owns it? Will we know if the story is withheld? The Tribune Company out in Chicago owns the Chicago Cubs. Even if the Chicago Tribune coverage of the baseball strike does not favor the owner's position, there's a perception, a feeling, that readers won't get the full story. Well, I'm afraid that I've asked more questions today than I've answered. In summary, please keep in mind that the docudrama, which will absorb you for the rest of the day, is only part of the story. But it's a good place to start, if only because the quiz show scandals were the end of the age of innocence and the beginning of the age of cynicism. I'm honored to be here as part of your discussion. Thank you very much.
I think we're all appreciative of Mr. Crane's comments, and we're going to field questions from the audience now. I'll be handling those in order. And if you could, when you ask your question, stand either at this mic or this mic so that people can hear you. Stand and identify yourself, if you would. Would you like to take the... Well, we need your lovely voice to go back yards, please. And if you could identify yourself, it'd be great.
My name is Albert Maisels, and I'll be part of the panel later on. I make documentary movies. I very rarely attend panels, and however, I was in California last week. I spent 3 days attending panels on biography, which of course is a form of literature and journalism, and all the issues of ethics that were brought up there. In this half hour, whatever it was, I must say that I learned more straight talk and good information on the questions of ethics than in the 3 days that I spent at the School of Journalism in California. Congratulations.
That's an easy question.
Especially that word, cynicism. We're enveloped in it. We're taken over by it. It's terrible. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Anyone else? A question or a comment? Okay, would you mind, is it possible for you to go either direction there?
Hi, my name is Paula Attridge, and I had a question. You didn't touch on infomercials and their evolution and where they're going, and I was just kind of curious on how you think they're going to evolve in the future.
Well, infomercials are part of what I was talking about, really, and this blurring. I am concerned, quite concerned about the blurring of entertainment and information. And infomercials and the home shopping networks are part of that. And in the interactive area, I think I attended a conference last Friday on the future of interactivity and how the advertisers can get involved in this kind of thing. And I frankly was a little bit startled because a year ago, the advertising community thought they were going to be shut out. They thought that it was going to be an adless future as far as interactivity in the new media was concerned. But as I said in a column that will run in Monday's Advertising Age, I got the idea that they were sort of emboldened now and that they felt that they could actually control the new media. And here's how it's going to happen. Procter & Gamble, for instance, makes Vicks products. And so what it would do is it would have a CD-ROM, and it would do an interactive type of program on the 5 stages of the common cold. And it would talk about how each of its products could be used at a various stage of the cold. And there wouldn't be any mention necessarily that Procter & Gamble was sponsoring this, or that this was indeed basically a commercial. And that differs so much in the way it's done now, because as we all know, the way it's done now is that the commercial appears on a program with other entertainment, and it's easily discerned when the commercial comes on and when the entertainment comes on. But I'm really quite concerned that in this new video age, that those distinctions are fast blurring. And the ad guys, I must tell you, seem to be very upbeat about this new future, and they've gone from thinking that they were going to be on the outside looking in to saying, hey, we're on the inside and we're controlling the situation. As for one other point that you didn't ask, but if I were an ad agency right now, I would wonder about my future, because do we really need ad agencies to put together CD-ROMs on the 5 stages of the common cold? I think not.
Maybe we'll have a cure for the common cold soon. Any other questions from the audience? Just stunned, huh? Okay, great. In the back?
Actually, I have 2 questions. My name's Mark. I'm a student of Dr. Payne's. In regard to floozies, first, I'm curious, where does one draw the line? I think the point was you have to look at whether the floozy is affecting the person's job, or number of floozies. I'm not sure. It wasn't quite clear to me where one draws the line there. The second thing I wanted to ask is about, in regard to the Wenners and the breakup, and reading in the paper, would it really have been such a big deal if he had taken up with another woman? In other words, is it not a bigger news because he's taken up with a man?
Yes.
And if so, does that go along with what you were saying? I seem to be...
Well, I think either way it would have been reported.
Right.
And one of our, I thought this was a very interesting thing to do, but right after that happened, a guy who writes a column for us took up basically what you said and called up the editor or publisher of a gay publication. And he said he was thinking of outing him by saying that he was going out with a woman. And the guy was stunned, and he couldn't believe it. And he said, that's irrelevant. That doesn't matter. And indeed, it doesn't matter. But if it's relevant, if the company is falling apart or could be broken up, it's relevant either way. I think that he took up with a man, he took up with a woman. More than that, though, Jan Wenner has made no secret about the fact that he has taken up with this Calvin Klein executive. He hasn't tried to hide it. And if he hasn't tried to hide it and it's relevant to the story, I think it certainly should be reported. And basically it has, widely. And I didn't answer the first question, I'm sorry. Equally relevant. Equally relevant, I would say, yes.
The first question was in regard to floozy. And I hate to keep using that word, but...
If you knew floozy like I know floozy.
But again, where does one draw the line? Who makes that decision?
Well, it's a matter of judgment. It's simply a matter of judgment. Should the press have reported JFK's escapades, where he had a revolving door with one woman after another? Should they have reported that? Did that reflect on his ability to do his job? Does it reflect, do the charges reflect on Bill Clinton's ability to do the job? Does it reflect on his judgment? I think it's a matter of judgment more than sexual escapades here that we're talking about. Well, the press has to make the decision because it's their job. And it's,
But still, there's no guidelines.
there are no
One
guidelines.
journalist, one or two indiscretions might be okay, but if somebody else, even one or two, even a candidate that's considered could be subject to the same kind of.
And let's hope that we don't have so much experience in that area that we get to have guidelines. I would hope that it would be an aberration that we wouldn't have to go into that often. But I would think that just because one reporter reports one or two discretions doesn't mean that the rest of the media should pick up the story just because one guy did. There again, it's the herd mentality. And reporters in the press have to pick their spots and have to feel that what they report is relevant and responsible. And if it's not, just because the next guy is reporting it doesn't mean they should.
We have time for one question, so, and it is you. So if you'd
Only
identify
one
yourself and
question.
ask, that'd be great.
I just wanted to mention, insofar as disclosure, many years ago, the Idaho statesmen in Idaho had an interesting disclosure in which they had their reporters write in their own backgrounds and say, for instance, what their political biases were if they worked on the campaign of John Jones. It has been interesting that no other newspaper has followed that since then. And given some of the other things you mentioned, infomercials, during many years the TV show The FBI was sponsored by Ford. If you watched it very closely, the FBI agents always had Ford cars, the bad guys had other cars. There are other tie-ins like that. I was wondering, do you think that there should be something of a disclosure in media? For instance, when Time magazine did a story on Close Encounters of the Third Kind and did a 5 or 6 page show spread on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, they did not mention the fact that the movie company that produced it was part of the same conglomerate of Time magazine, which may have, which perhaps might be of interest to a reader who might think they were puffing their own product.
I think there should be disclosures, and I think if there are disclosures, it gives the media more credibility, because then it's all reported. It's no secret, and the reader gets the idea that the publication isn't trying to hide something. And I noticed, for instance, that a great publication like the Wall Street Journal, whenever any of their reporters are mentioned in another context, or that something else of related nature happens, they always say that. They always say such and such, by the way, works for the Wall Street Journal, so that the reader can draw his or her own conclusion about the reliability of the information. Thanks again.
Thank you all for your attention and contributions to this discussion. And I think we begin again at 2:30 with the second panel. So welcome back. We'll welcome you back then. Thanks a lot.
I'd like to welcome you to the afternoon session of the Helen and Cecil Rose Ethics and Docudrama Conference. We are very, very pleased to have a very distinguished panel that continues the same types of deliberation that we had this morning, only more particularly on the docudrama format and on Robert Redford's Academy Award nominee quiz show. Prior to our discussion, which will include distinguished panelists who know quiz show very well, that is the executive producer and some documentary filmmakers, an actor, as well as an individual who feels very closely tied to the script and the storyline. What we would like to do is, for those who do not understand the essence of what that's all about, is to play a bit of a documentary to give you some background material on quiz show. And after that time, what I'm going to do is ask one of our panelists, Judy Raphael Kletter, to give the opening remarks. As I said, though, as we look at this group of panelists, it's a very distinguished group. First of all, we have Albert Meisel, who is a filmmaker. And Albert Meisel just learned this morning that he is going to be going to Korea very, very soon for another North Korea. That's even more exciting. Those of you who know his work know, of course, his work in Give Me Shelter, as well as The Beatles, The First U.S. Visit. Someone who is just freshly off the plane, actually, we're very pleased to see him, and I think Diego is even more pleased because he was there waiting for him, is Fred Zolo, who was on the West Coast and who's come in. He is the executive producer of Quiz Show. We then have Richard Goodwin, who is en route from Houston, but said he will be here. He's on his way in the car, so he will be joining us shortly. Richard Goodwin, as you know, is a historian. He is also someone who we all know was a presidential aide to John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, and in his book, Remembering America, devoted an entire chapter to the Quiz Show scandal. In addition to that, we have Frank Anise, who is a television and theatrical actor. Many of you probably wondered, gee, I think I've seen him about this time during the day. He has been on Days of Our Lives. He's been a guest star on L.A. Law, Murder, She Wrote, Hill Street Blues, and 21 Jump Street. He's going to be talking about some of the ethical implications of playing historical figures in these types of endeavors. We're then also very happy to bring back to Emerson, even though she's on leave, to give some critical commentary, our own star and expert, and that is Jan Roberts-Breslin, who's a documentary filmmaker and scholar. So in starting to this afternoon's panel, what I would like initially to do is to show us just a very brief picture of what Quiz Show is all about, and then we'll ask Judy Kletter to come to the podium. Thank you.
Back then, I just found to work entire decade. President Dwight Eisenhower called the deception a terrible thing to do to the American public. The audience, the medium, and the participants themselves would never be the same. As a consequence of what began to unravel
Well, this goes on, and it's a very, very interesting piece to watch, and we would encourage, if you would like to see it, please stop by and we will arrange that. But we do have those people who are responsible for putting together the quiz show, as well as those people who have questions about docudrama. And we have also Jane Shattuck, who's going to be a respondent who was able to make it in today. A person that I would like to introduce before Judy Kletter is someone that we are very happy to have at Emerson College, and that is another generation of Kletters, and that is Alyssa Kletter. Alyssa.
Well, I just want to introduce my mother, who actually graduated Emerson, as you all know at this point, in 1966. And it was kind of interesting because I always thought of Emerson, because my dad graduated from Emerson too, as being, you know, if you graduate from Emerson, you work in TV or advertising or something, and my mom wasn't exactly in that field. And then all of a sudden she reads this article of mine in Rolling Stone magazine that I had, which, you know, probably every time she saw it was like, ooh, what's this, long-haired people on the cover or something. And she reads this article about, I believe it was a movie review on Quiz Show, and talking about some of the issues in there. And the next thing I know, she picks that up, and she's got articles published in Ad Age and editorial in the New York Times, and all these things going on. And it was just like, whoa, go mom. So, and I was like, oh, well, maybe I can hone in on this. Maybe she'll get on TV, and I could go and get an internship or something. But so I finally did see the movie Quiz Show, and I realized that even after all the talk around my house about the movie and knowing, you know, what was fact and what was fiction, and I realized that when you see a movie like based on a true event, even no matter what you know is fact, you just believe the movie. You know, it's mediated reality, and it's very true. So, and that's what my mom is going to talk about. And so without further ado, here's my mom, who's worked very hard for this conference, Judy Rayfield Kletter.
Hi, thank you. I was more nervous about what my daughter would say about me, because I thought this could be her revenge, but it was very nice. Thank you, Elisa. Good afternoon, President Levergott, distinguished speakers, invited guests, faculty, and students. I want to thank you all for coming today to the day-long Helen and Cecil Rose Conference on Ethics, the Communication Conference here at Emerson College. This is all made possible thanks to the generosity of Helen Rose, an Emerson graduate of the class of 1938. She has totally funded this event, and for that we are eternally grateful. As my daughter said, I'm Judy Rayfield Kletter. My husband and I met at Emerson and are graduates of the class of 1966. We have two daughters. Elisa, who you met, is a junior majoring in television and will be graduating next year, hopefully. And my other daughter is named Jenny, and she's a freshman at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. You may be wondering why I'm here and how I got involved in the Ethics and Communication Conference. Now I'll tell you. As Elisa started to say, in September of last year, I read her review in Rolling Stone's magazine, in which they implicated the sponsor in the deception in the movie. The sponsor happens to be my father-in-law, Edward Kletter. I then reread parts of Judge Joseph Stone and Tim Yan's book, Primetime and Misdemeanors, investigating the 1950 TV quiz show scandals. This book is one of my documented authorities on the subject. Richard Goodwin, who is on our panel, who is author of Remembering America, A Voice from the 60s, in which he devotes a chapter to the quiz show scandals, and which quiz show is loosely based, describes Judge Stone as, quote, diligent, experienced, incorruptible, the rarest of public servants, concerned with uncovering and disclosing the truth wherever credit might go, end of quotes. Judge Stone's book documented that my father-in-law, Ed Kletter, was the person who dealt directly with Jack Barry and Dan Enright and the networks, and was the only representative who attended the hearings in New York and D.C. Ed Kletter was cleared of any knowledge of involvement with the riggings. Although the movie did contrive a fictitious character as the sponsor, the only fictitious name in the movie, by the way, the person who in fact represented the sponsor is my father-in-law, Edward Kletter. Judge Stone shared with me my father-in-law's congressional hearing testimony, which concurred that he was not involved in the rigging of 21. Having my facts in order, I went to talk to a friend at NBC who referred me to the Museum of Television and Radio to watch old 21 shows. I then met with a friend at a public relations firm, and I finally saw a senior editor at People magazine. Having everything cleared in my mind, I saw the movie on September 23rd, and again with my husband Michael on September 24th. Because my daughter Elisa learned about all the quiz show scandals in the 1950s in her Introduction to Mass Communication and History of Broadcasting classes, I did not want Mr. Redford to get away with rewriting history. I wrote an essay and faxed it to the New York Times. Within a half hour, they responded saying they wanted to print it in the form of a letter to the editor, and I was also interviewed in their office. My letter appeared on October 3rd. As a result of this letter, I received letters and phone calls from supporters both in and out of the industry. Rance Crane, president of Crane Communications and editor-in-chief of Advertising Age, read my New York Times letter and had his staff contact me to do a follow-up story which appeared in the October 24th edition of Advertising Age. I was also interviewed, and my story appeared in the December issue of Us magazine. My letter was also published in Shoot magazine, and Albert Maisel, who is on our panel, who makes award-winning documentaries, called my husband after reading my letter. My story was also picked up by the Boston Globe and National Review. I had no contact with them and was surprised when friends informed me of these articles. I may be mentioned in other publications as well. On October 29th, at Emerson's Parents' Weekend, I spoke to President Jackie Liebergott, who read my New York Times letter and was very excited about it. She told me she and Dr. Gregory Payne, chairman of the Communication Studies Department, wanted me to head and formulate an ethics conference based on this and to line up speakers of my choice. I had a meeting with Fred Zolo, executive producer of Quiz Show, who incidentally is a former resident of Massachusetts, who graciously consented to being a speaker at this conference. Quiz Show has been nominated for 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Mr. Zolo told me this movie was fiction, but I don't believe that to be the case. I assumed he was kidding. Quiz Show takes broad dramatic license. The film uses the names of real people and has been positioned by its makers as a righteous statement on ethics and morality. It has been described by most critics as a docudrama. This contradiction is what we will address today. The hero or detective in the movie is Richard Goodwin, who in reality at the time was a young congressional investigator. Reuven Frank, a past president of NBC News, wrote in the New Leader magazine, and I quote, "Errors become immortal. An axiom of the publicity trade holds that once even small mistakes get into print, they enter permanent files and years later are discovered by researchers who proclaim them as irrefutable truths. There are errors large and small in Quiz Show. Some people in the audience will remember fragments of what actually happened. The others will accept the screen version as history." End of quotes. I cannot allow this to happen. A friend of mine is a professor who teaches the history of television course at Columbia University in New York City. He is interested in learning the truth about the 1950s to teach it accurately to his students. He has become my inspiration and mentor in this endeavor. Without his support and encouragement, I would not be here today. According to what I've read about Mr. Redford in the Orlando Sentinel, he talks proudly about his children, and I quote, "I have 2 daughters and a son and 3 grandchildren. I worked at being a father. I made a determination to turn things around from how they were between my father and myself. I always wanted my children to know how I felt and to know that I loved them. Family relationships are the oldest you can find." End of quote. Mr. Redford and I both love our families. The family name is the legacy we pass on to our children. Ed Kletter is Elisa and Jenny's grandfather. Ed has 5 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren. As I stated in my New York Times letter, I do not want Robert Redford's quiz show to become the textbook on this period. I don't want the grandchildren of Edward Kletter to be ashamed of their grandfather. Skeptics may speculate as to why I came forward, especially when the sponsor's name was the only fictitious name in the movie. Who would ever know? The answer should be obvious, because my family and I knew, and I could not, in good conscience, do nothing. Elisa, who I think is quite astute and very intelligent, assumed that most of what she saw on the screen was true, as do most people who see the movie. The Chicago Tribune quotes Mr. Redford, "I just tried to make a film that would entertain, be truthful, and provoke, to make us think about ethics at a time when ethics are in danger." End of quote. Well, I was entertained. The movie was not truthful on many points, and it did provoke me and many others in a negative way for the liberties it took. It definitely is making me think about ethics at a time when ethics are in danger, especially the lack of ethics in the movie. I had written Mr. Redford a letter expressing my concerns about the movie and inviting him to attend the conference. He never responded. So much for his ethics and manners. My ethics convinced me to do this conference. Last night, I practiced this speech before a class full of students. At the conclusion, one student remarked that it was nice that I didn't go the celebrity route with this and that I came to the college. I was approached by a talk show, but I refused, nor did I want to do tabloid interviews. I wanted to reach my goals with integrity and maybe make a difference and teach students not to believe everything they read or see. This can only be done tastefully in the academic setting. I'm so glad Emerson is letting me accomplish this today. In closing, I hope we can all learn and benefit from this conference today. I am very appreciative to all our speakers for arranging their schedules to make the time and effort to be here today. I especially want to thank Dr. Gregory Payne, there you are, I especially want to thank Dr. Gregory Payne for all his hard work in putting this conference together and making it all happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. As we have done in the early sessions, what we're allowing people to do is to have a 5 to 6 minute synopsis of their particular perspectives, then opening it up among the panel members, and then after that opening it up to the audience in terms of questions to get a better arrival, and then having some of the respondents give their perspectives. As I said, Jane Shattuck is a respondent, and also Michael Kletter is a respondent. We're very fortunate now to have, as I said, someone who's heading to North Korea soon, but luckily we were able to get him here in central Boston. And here to give his synopsis on this important, I would say, dialogue on docudrama and documentary is Albert Meisel. Mr. Meisel?
I remember many years ago I was making a film about Fidel Castro, and I attended some embassy function of all only communist countries were there. Somehow a fellow Bostonian and I were the only Americans. I forget how we actually got in there. But I remember my friend from Boston came back to me just asked this man from Korea whether he was from North Korea or South Korea, and he got all flustered. Well, of course, the only person who could be there would be somebody from North Korea. And there is a big difference, of course, between those two countries. But but it's my way of saying that someone has said God is in the details. God is in the details. Honesty is in the details. And if the details aren't right, I'm not accusing those who break the rules as being irreligious, right? But it's almost a religious sort of thing for documentarians, at least, to get everything exactly right. I received an award not long ago, and I was trying to figure out, well, I only have a few words to say. What is it in one word that's the most important thing about making a documentary film? It's being exact. Not just close, but exact. That's what a person whom you're describing his character in a film, that's what history deserves. Absolute, total exactness, and nothing short of it. Now, I don't. That's, of course, one of the things that makes this discussion somewhat contentious. How exact can you be when you're making a docudrama, or do you want to be? Because you have to sacrifice in a semi-fiction film or whatever. These lines are so difficult to draw between fact and fiction when it comes to docudrama.